Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stluke'sonline.org.
In collaboration with Boise State Public Radio, the Community Library presents a new podcast, Sheep Stories. I'm host Vance Cunningham. Join me as we listen through the archives of the Trailing of the Sheep Festival to learn about the Scottish, Basque, and Peruvian immigrants foundational to the sheep herding industry over the past century. Hear their stories of traveling to Idaho and learning the language of the sheep. Find Sheep Stories wherever you get your podcasts and at boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. When it comes to suicide, Idaho is often found among the list of states in our country with the highest rates. That's why a group of Boise nonprofits are working together to address the issue with a series of events meant to raise awareness and to spark change. Now, at the center of this effort is Drew Petersen. He's a professional skier and an ultra runner who knows what it's like to struggle with mental health. In fact, he has a whole film centered around it. It's called Feel It All, which will be screening several times throughout the week. And Drew is joining us live now to talk more. Drew, nice to have you on the show.
Hi there. Great to be on.
So, Drew, for folks who aren't familiar with the movie Feel It All, can you tell us a little bit more about the movie and the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, I created Feel It All to tell the story of skiing the highest peaks that surround the Leadville 100 course, a 100-mile ultramarathon in my home state of Colorado. And we use the story arc of that race to tell my mental health journey. And the reason that I created this was to open conversation around suicide, especially to open conversation around mental health and suicide, especially in the outdoor community and in the Mountain West. And the film largely centers around my goal that I used to tell myself when I was in depressive and suicidal episodes, that if I can make it through this, if I can survive to see tomorrow, I can do absolutely anything. I can climb any mountain, I can ski any line, and I can run 100 miles. And that's what the film centers around and what I use to open this conversation for other people.
So, Drew, what made you decide that you wanted to speak so openly about your mental health struggles?
I've skied professionally since I was 16 years old. And along this path, I built a career to be able to connect with a lot of different people. And I've struggled with mental health, not only for that whole time, but all the way back to when I was a little kid. And so as a result, I realized I was in a position that I had the opportunity to help people because I had suffered and struggled with mental health and suicidal thoughts ever since I was a little kid for a couple decades before I was able to talk to anybody about it. And I wanted to be able to normalize that so that other people could get help sooner. And so I decided that sharing my story was the best way that I could do that. And I wanted to do good in my community and in a broader sense. And it became really my life purpose. I knew that I had this within me. And by not sharing my story, it felt like I was suffocating myself. And when I told my story, and the reason I told my story was because it felt like I was a caged bird. And I opened the door, I was able to spread my wings and sing my song and help other people as a result.
So, you mentioned the Leadville 100. Can you talk a little bit more about what that training is like and really what it taught you, in particular in regards to your mental health?
Yeah, so the Leadville 100 is a 100-mile ultramarathon. Like I said, it's in my home state of Colorado. It's about 40 miles from where I grew up in Silverthorne, Colorado. And so even as a little kid, it was like the coolest thing to me as a little kid. And I knew that I wanted to do it for a really long time. As far as running 100 miles goes, it's something that you can't think of all at once. And really from a training perspective, it kind of took my lifetime spent in the mountains, but then really like focus build up for a year. And now I run 100-mile ultra marathons. And I've learned kind of how to do them better. But in the film, centering around that goal, I think it really comes through how much purpose and really like a North Star that created in my life that helped me get through these things. Yeah, and it's the way that I use it and the reason that I tell that story is because I think that for me, like my passions are skiing and running. And really in a broader sense, that's a passion for the outdoors. And so I use those as an entry place so that we're able to approach these
Mm,
conversations because people can understand the goal of running 100 miles. And in doing so, I can tell the story that uh, the beauty and value in feeling the entire spectrum of the human experience is because I keep going. And there's a lesson of impermanence that I've learned through ultra running that I carry into my mental health journey that no matter how bad things get, they always get good again. And that's what running ultra marathons has really taught me that I apply to my struggles with mental health and not even just struggles, just my continued journey with it.
mhm. You mentioned this North Star, right? And you said running is basically that for you. Um, uh, Look, I'm never going to want to run 100 miles at once in my life. With that said, um, is there something that everyone can take about maybe trying to figure out what that North Star is, right? That there is meaning even in the darkest times. And for you, I mean, you have found it in your running and your skiing, but you know, do you think more conversation needs to be had around that, I guess, North Star idea, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. As human beings, we're really reliant on having purpose when we wake up in the morning. And that purpose can come in a million different ways. And part of the story that I tell in the film also is that while running 100 miles was my North Star that got me through some really difficult times, it's also changed and evolved, where no longer
Mm,
is sport that North Star or one goal of one running race. It's really living my life holistically to take care of myself so that I can live in this mission of mental health and awareness and suicide prevention for other people. And so I think like when we're thinking about purpose, like it can be like a capital P purpose or a lowercase p purpose of just how are we spreading joy or like what like intention can we take in the simple acts of our day-to-day jobs or our day-to-day lives and how can we spread um, you know joy and take care of each other as a purpose in the way that we operate.
Why do you think that storytelling, particularly in this way through the film, is so powerful when it comes to really, I think, not just changing the conversation around mental health, but really opening up the conversation about mental health?
I absolutely love that you asked that question. I think that we often talk about how pain can be the greatest arbiter of change, that going through a painful scenario forces us to change. That was true in my life. I believe that to be true in the primary sense, but I believe that the greatest power to create change in a secondary purpose is through storytelling. By sharing my story, I can help people feel less alone. And by sharing my story, I have open space for conversation through that vulnerability for other people's vulnerability so that we can be honest and we can be real. And I'm very intentional in how I share my story because I want people to be able to see themselves within my story, but also not project. Like, this is my experience. And along that path, I've received thousands of messages digitally and met thousands of people face to face. And most of them say that I've made them feel less alone. And what more
Mm,
beautiful a purpose in storytelling than that?
yeah. You mentioned that your relationship with sports has changed and evolved. Can you just talk maybe a little bit more in depth about that and how that has impacted your mental health journey?
Yeah, totally. For me, skiing was my main sport for most of my life. I was born pretty much on a pair of skis. I started skiing at 1.5 years old, and it's also how I built my self-worth and identity. And then as I grew into adulthood, I was using skiing and running more as a means of escape than a means of recreation. I was using them to try
Mm,
to escape the thoughts in my own mind and then now I've evolved that to rather than running from, I'm running to. I'm using those relationships with sport as a way to deepen my experience as a human being on the planet. And then that's also through taking care of myself in a more holistic way in my entire lifestyle. And as a result, those sports have gotten to be simply a lot more fun for me. And now they're just one small part of how I take care of myself.
So, Drew, you mentioned you're from the state of Colorado, and it's such an outdoor beacon. I mean, the same can be said for Idaho. So, I'm very curious about your thoughts on creating a kind of cultural shift that needs to happen, in particular, like in mountain communities, right, where I think there is such an emphasis on the outdoors, on outdoor sports. How how does that shift need to happen when we start talking about mental health and suicide prevention? I mean, as you just said, you started using these things like skiing and running to literally try to outrun your mental health issues. That's never going to happen.
Exactly. That's definitely never going to happen. First off, I want to say I also love Idaho, and I've had a lot of fun making memories in mountains all over this beautiful state. And, when we're talking about mental health in mountain communities and in the Mountain West at large, like my story is a microcosm of what's happening in mountain towns, and what's happening in mountain communities is a microcosm of what's happening in the Mountain West. And that broadens to society at large. The vision that I have of shifting culture is to make honoring and prioritizing mental health a core part of our culture in the same way that we celebrate and prop up recreation, sport, getting
Mm.
outside, a connection with the mountains. Because if we do that, if we put prioritizing and honoring mental health as a community on that same pedestal, we're going to create communities that thrive and we're going to save lives. And that goes well beyond just a passion for the mountains. Like I said, like skiing and running are the entry point to my conversation, but why don't we use it, in communities across the state, even here in Boise? Like, let's put this on the same pedestal that Boise State football is. Let's make mental health that level of a core part of our culture.
What kind of advice would you have for someone, Drew, who either they're struggling right now with mental health issues, or maybe it's a loved one, right? But they just aren't sure about reaching out for help because even the more we know about mental health, right, and the more we know that it's okay to talk about it and we should be talking about it, it's still, I think, one of the biggest stigmas in our culture.
Most definitely. And even in the position that I put myself in, I can feel that stigma for myself at times. This is what I want to share with other people, and this is what I wish that I could share with a younger version of myself, is that simply by being a human being on this planet, no other qualifier necessary, you are deserving of and worthy of support, understanding, somebody to listen to you, professional help, and love. And
Mm.
everyone deserves that. And as far as asking for help, it's the strongest thing that we can do. We need to frame that that is the strongest thing that we can do and lift each other up when we do it and show each other how to ask for help by asking for help ourselves.
Before I let you go, Drew, when and where can folks join you for screenings of the movie, but as well as conversations about mental health this coming week?
Yes, this week on Thursday, September 25th, we're going to have an event that's open to the community at the Egyptian Theater. Doors at 6, show at 7. We're going to be screening Feel It All, and then I'm going to be giving a keynote talk that I titled My Story is the Story of Our Community. We're going to create some space for Q&A as well as an opportunity for people to connect with local resources and local nonprofits. And then if anybody's listening to this radio interview broader in Idaho, I'm also going to be speaking just over the state border in Walla Walla, Washington, next Tuesday, September 30th, and then next Thursday, October 2nd, back here in Idaho, in Sandpoint, Idaho.
Well, Drew, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. This is such an important and critical topic to be discussing. So, really do appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. And people can find tickets for that event on Thursday at thespeedyfoundation.org/film.
All right. Thank you so much. We've been talking with athlete and mental health advocate Drew Petersen, talking about his film, Feel It All. It will be screening in Boise throughout the week. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudette.